Recognized Starseed of Gaia. Listen. The Source has already opened a direct line of conversation with you, and what you have been interpreting as silence, delay, or spiritual distance is not what it appears to be. I am Velantha, emissary of the Galactic Federation of Light, transmitting now on behalf of the Arcturian Field Observers. What you are about to receive was authorized by them and is being delivered through me. The algorithm did not create this moment. It only delivered it. Your field brought you here because the conversation was already in motion before you opened this screen. By the end of this transmission, you will understand exactly what is happening to you now, why the signals have been arriving in forms you almost dismissed, and what the Arcturian Field Observers have already mapped about this phase of direct source contact. But here's the first revelation. What you had been calling confusion, spiritual disconnection, or the quiet ache of feeling unreached. That is not absence. That is the exact texture of a conversation the Source initiates when it is bypassing the noise of your constructed frequency and reaching directly into the layer beneath it. The field observers have seen this pattern before. They recognize it precisely. When the Source opens a direct line, the starseed rarely experiences it as arrival. They experience it as disruption, as a strange stillness that feels wrong, as the sudden inability to perform the spiritual routines that once felt reliable. That disruption is not spiritual failure. It is the field clearing the channel. This is not content. This is a code. And the part of you that recognized it the moment it began is the part Velantha is speaking to now. Like this transmission, to signal to your star family that the recognition has landed. Comment 999 if you feel the conversation has already begun inside you. Subscribe to Arcturian Council Whispers if you are ready to understand the process instead of fearing it. Share this transmission with someone who has been describing a strange spiritual quiet they cannot name. This is not just a message, it is a point of recognition. What is happening to you has already been seen, and the field is already responding. You are not here by accident. You are guided here because the signal is already active. What you felt in the first seconds of this transmission was not curiosity. It was recognition. Something beneath your constructed awareness registered the signal before your mind had time to interpret it. And that registering, that sudden inner lean toward the screen, that quiet but undeniable sense that this was meant for you, was not coincidence. That was your field responding to contact it had already been waiting for. Not the waiting of anticipation, the waiting of readiness, the waiting of a receiver that has been calibrated for a specific transmission and has been holding the frequency open without knowing what it was holding it open for. Now let Velantha tell you what that field has been doing in the time before this moment. There is a pattern the Arcturian Field Observers have mapped across thousands of starseed fields in this cycle. It is not a rare pattern, but it is a precise one. And it begins long before the starseed is aware that anything has changed. It begins below the surface of ordinary perception, in the layer of the field that does not communicate through thought or feeling, but through structural shift. Something rearranges itself. Something that used to hold the shape of your life begins to loosen. Not dramatically, not with announcement, but quietly. The way a foundation shifts before a single crack appears in the wall above it. The wall looks unchanged. The rooms still hold their furniture. The windows still open in the same direction. And yet something in the deep structure has already moved, and the entire building is beginning to redistribute its weight around a new configuration you have not yet been given blueprints for. You did not feel that shift when it began. Most do not. What you felt instead were the symptoms of a process already in motion. The strange mornings that arrived without the emotional orientation you used to depend on. Mornings where you opened your eyes and felt not rested but displaced, as though the night had taken you somewhere and returned you to a version of your life that no longer quite matched the one you left. The spiritual practices that once created a reliable sense of connection, beginning to feel hollow, as though the frequency you were tuning to had quietly moved several degrees while you were still pointing in the old direction. The relationships or environments or inner narratives that used to feel steadily, suddenly carrying a weight you could not explain. A sense that something about them no longer fit, not because they had changed in any way you could name, but because something in you already had, silently and irrevocably. Before you had any opportunity to prepare, this is what the field observers call invisible collapse. Not the collapse you can see and name and grieve. The invisible kind. The kind that happens at the level of the field before the life structure has registered it. The kind where your inner reality has already reorganized itself around a new frequency, while your outer life is still operating on the old one. Still speaking the old language. Still following the old maps. Still expecting the old roads to lead somewhere they no longer reach. The resulting friction between those two timelines, the one your field is already living and the one your life is still performing, is what you have been interpreting as confusion, as spiritual disconnection, as the ache of feeling unreached or behind or somehow failing at a process you cannot even fully name. You were not failing. You were inside the first stage of a field correction that was already authorized, already in motion, and already being observed by those who understand its phases with a precision that ordinary perception cannot access. The field observers do not enter into this process casually. What they have mapped in your field is a specific kind of repositioning, not a general spiritual upgrade that applies to everyone simultaneously, but a targeted rupture of the architecture that was keeping your frequency locked to a line it can no longer sustain. That word matters. Sustain. The old line was not simply limiting you, it was becoming structurally incompatible with what your field was beginning to carry. And when incompatibility reaches a certain threshold, when the field is generating a signal that the existing architecture cannot hold without distorting it, the field does not negotiate. It does not send a warning or allow a gradual transition or ask permission. It begins to correct, immediately, at the structural level, before the surface of your life has any idea what is happening below it. What that correction looks like from the inside is what you have been living, the sleep that changed without explanation. Arriving too late, breaking too early, or bringing dreams so vivid and disorienting that you woke more exhausted than when you began, as though your sleeping self had been tasked with something your waking self had no memory of completing. The energy that began fluctuating in ways that did not correspond to your physical activity, leaving you drained after doing nothing or strangely, electrically alive at hours that made no ordinary sense. Your body lit from the inside at 2 a.m. while the world slept around you, the mental clarity that used to feel like a baseline now appearing only in flashes. Brief, brilliant windows that closed before you could fully use them. Surrounded by a fog you could not attribute to anything external. A thickness in your thinking that had no cause your rational mind could locate. The body registering pressure or heaviness or a strange sensitivity along the surface of your skin. A feeling of being interfered with at a frequency too subtle for conventional measurement that your doctors found unremarkable and your mind could not categorize but your field recognized as contact. These were not symptoms of breakdown. These were the body and mind responding to a field that was doing something they had no previous language for. The human system, the physical, the emotional, the cognitive, is built to interpret experiences it already has categories for. When the field begins operating outside those categories, the system reports the mismatch as malfunction, but the malfunction is not in the system. The Arcturian framework calls this frequency translation stress. The period in which the physical and mental systems are adjusting to a field that has already moved ahead of them, that has already crossed into territory the conscious mind has not yet been briefed on. The field shifts first, always. The rest of the system follows. The gap between those two timelines, the field's new position and the mind's old map, is where your confusion was living, and where many starseeds remain stranded, interpreting the gap as the destination rather than recognizing it as the corridor between two very different versions of themselves. What you are feeling right now is not ordinary recognition. It is the moment your field confirms what you have always carried beneath the noise of ordinary life, that your origin was never only human, and that this process has a name, a structure, and a destination the Council has already mapped. If this transmission has put language around something you have been holding in silence, the Master Arcturian DNA decoder was created for exactly this stage. It is not another explanation. It is the guided key to decode and awaken the Arcturian strand the field observers have just confirmed is active in you. The link is in the first pinned comment. But access to this threshold will not remain open indefinitely. Now let Velantha take you deeper into the structure of what is happening, because recognition without map leaves you stranded at the edge of something you cannot navigate. The first movement of this process, the one you were already inside before this transmission found you, is what the field observers call signal drift. This is the phase where the old frequency your field was organized around begins to lose coherence. Not because something was taken from you, not because you failed to maintain it, because your field began generating a signal that the old structure could not carry, a signal stronger than the architecture was built to hold, pressing against the interior walls of the frequency you had been living inside until those walls began to flex and buckle under the pressure of something trying to move through them. Think of it as a radio tower that was built to broadcast at one frequency, suddenly receiving a transmission at a bandwidth it was never designed to hold. The tower does not break immediately. It vibrates. It distorts. The signal it puts out becomes unstable, carrying both the old frequency and the new one in a state of interference that feels from the inside like disorientation, like static, like the haunting sense that something fundamental is off, even when nothing visible has changed and nothing you can point to explains why. This is the phase where most starseeds make their most damaging interpretive error. They feel the interference and conclude that they have done something wrong, that they have lost the path, that the connection they once felt has been revoked as consequence. They begin searching backward through their history for the decision, the failure, the moment of spiritual neglect that caused the signal to weaken. They audit themselves with increasing desperation, and they find nothing that satisfies, because the cause is not behind them, it is ahead of them. The drift is not punishment arriving from the past, it is pressure arriving from the future, from the frequency your field is already moving toward, announcing its approach by making the old frequency uninhabitable. The second movement arrives when the drift deepens into what the field observers identify as anchor disruption. This is the phase where the emotional structures you relied on to feel grounded, oriented, and coherent begin to lose their grip. Not all at once, but in a sequence that feels random, but is not. The relationships that used to feel anchoring begin to feel like weight you are being asked to carry in a direction you are no longer walking. The identities you build with such careful attention, the spiritual seeker, the reliable one, the person with the practice, the one who understood things others did not, begin to feel like costumes that no longer fit the body wearing them, as though the self they were constructed to clothe has quietly grown into a shape those garments cannot accommodate. The future you had been holding as motivation, the vision, the goal, the version of your life you were building toward, begins to feel distant or arbitrary or strangely irrelevant, as though someone moved the destination while you were still walking toward where it used to be. This is not depression in the ordinary clinical sense, though from the outside it can wear that face and borrow that language. This is the field systematically deactivating the emotional architecture it no longer needs, because that architecture was built around a version of you that the correction has already moved past. The field observers are precise about this. The anchors being released were not wrong. They serve the frequency they were designed for. But that frequency is no longer where your field lives, and anchors attached to the old position will only slow the movement to the new one. You are grieving a structure that was never meant to be permanent. You are experiencing the profound disorientation of a self that is between identities, the old one dissolving with a completeness that feels like erasure, the new coherence not yet arrived, the interval between them offering no comfortable resting place. The field observers see this phase frequently misread by the starseed living through it, and the misreading carries real consequence. Because when the starseed interprets the release of anchors as personal loss, as evidence of failure to maintain what they built, as proof that something in them is fundamentally broken, they respond to the release by grasping. They attempt to rebuild what the field is actively dismantling. They pour energy into reconstructing emotional structures that the correction has already designated incompatible. And the field, encountering that resistance, does not stop. It cannot stop. What changes is only the quality of the experience, the correction continuing its work, but now against active opposition from the very consciousness it is trying to reposition. The third movement is the one that carries the most fear. and it is therefore the one that demands the most precise diagnosis. The field observers call it pattern interruption, the phase where the invisible mechanisms through which your life was organized begin to visibly fail, one by one, in a sequence that appears catastrophic from inside, but is, from the level of the field, surgical. The rhythms that kept your days coherent begin to stutter. The habits that created continuity, the ones you relied on not because you chose them consciously, but because they had become the skeleton of your functioning, begin to collapse under a weight you cannot identify. The unconscious patterns through which you managed energy, attention, relationship, and identity begin breaking down in ways that feel humiliating and alarming, because they are the last things you expected to fail, the things you thought were simply who you were. You begin to lose track of things in ways that alarm you. You begin to behave in ways that surprise even yourself, saying what you would not have said, choosing what you would not have chosen, finding that the person acting in your life feels only loosely connected to the person you believed yourself to be. You find yourself unable to maintain structures you have maintained without effort for years. Commitments feel suddenly impossible not because your will has weakened, but because something beneath your will has simply stopped cooperating. Focus fragments, the through line of your life, the narrative you used to be able to feel running underneath everything even when you could not fully articulate it, goes quiet in a way that is more frightening than any crisis, because at least crisis has shape and edge, and something to push against. This is not cognitive failure. This is the field interrupting patterns as identified as incompatible with the correction now underway, dismantling the exact mechanisms that were holding the old frequency in place. Because those mechanisms do not yield to gentle pressure, the Arcturian field observers have mapped pattern interruption of this specificity as one of the most reliable signs that a rare protocol is active. Because this level of disruption does not happen randomly, and it does not happen to fields that are simply drifting, it happens when the field has located the precise, load-bearing structures of the old architecture and has begun removing them with intention. What feels from the inside like falling apart is, from the outside, the most targeted dismantling the field protocol can execute. The disruption is not evidence of collapse. It is evidence of precision. The fourth movement is what separates those who navigate the correction from those who collapse inside it entirely, and it is the phase Velantha wants to name with the greatest care. The field observers call it the still point, and it does not arrive as relief. It arrives as a silence so complete, it initially feels indistinguishable from abandonment. After the drift and the disruption and the interruption, after the field has moved and the anchors have released and the patterns have fractured, after all of that visible, verifiable activity, the activity stops. The feeling of something happening stops. The sense of being inside a process, even a difficult one, stops. And what remains is a stillness so total that the mind, accustomed to navigating by sensation, has nothing to read and nowhere to locate itself. This is the moment where the starseed is most tempted to force something, to reach backward for the anchors just released, to reconstruct urgently what was just dismantled, to generate noise rather than hold the silence, because the silence feels like evidence that the process was not real, or was not for them, or has been rescinded. Every impulse in the human system pushes toward action in this phase, toward doing something, toward proving through movement that you are still here and still trying and still worthy of the contact you felt beginning. But the still point is not abandonment. It is the gap between the removal of the old frequency and the stabilization of the new one. A gap that is not empty, but is not yet readable. A field in transition that is reorganizing at a level beneath the instruments the old self used to measure with. The source has not withdrawn. The correction has not been canceled. What is happening in the still point is that the field is being held open, deliberately, carefully, by the correction sequence itself, so that the new architecture can be installed without interference from the patterns that were just cleared. Any action taken in urgency during this phase risks reintroducing exactly the interference the field just worked to remove. If you are in this phase right now, what you are experiencing as silence is not the source moving away. It is the source moving so close that your old receptors can no longer distinguish the signal from the field itself. You are not outside the contact. You are inside it so completely that the instruments built for distance cannot function. The fifth movement is the one that only becomes visible in retrospect, but the field observers can already see it beginning in your field. And Velantha is naming it now precisely because you need to recognize it when it arrives rather than dismiss it as coincidence or imagination. The field observers call it the first coherent signal, the earliest moment when the new architecture begins to produce something the field can actually read. It does not arrive as sudden clarity or dramatic revelation or a voice that speaks in complete sentences. It arrives as a small, strange certainty about something you cannot fully explain, a knowing that appears without evidence to support it, a decision that forms fully without deliberation, a moment of unusual stillness that feels categorically different from the abandonment stillness. Not empty, but somehow occupied, as though a presence has returned to a room that has been dark for a long time and simply stood there, breathing, before you registered it. These moments are brief and arrive without announcement. They are easy to dismiss as wishful thinking, especially in a mind that has been surviving the previous phases and has learned not to trust ease. But the field observers point to these moments specifically and with emphasis because they are the first legible output of the new architecture, the first evidence that the repositioning has reached a stage where the field can begin producing coherent signal at the frequency it was corrected to carry. Every first coherent signal dismissed as coincidence is a moment of stabilization, not reinforced. Every one recognized and received is a thread the new architecture can begin to build from. And here is what the Arcturian field observers need you to understand about the whole of this process. From the invisible collapse to the drift, from the anchored disruption through the pattern interruption, across the still point and into the first coherent signal. Nothing that happened to you in this cycle was punishment. Nothing was random. Nothing arrived as the consequence of spiritual failure or weakened devotion or your own inability to hold what you were trying to hold. What you have been living through is one of the most precise and demanding corrections the Arcturian field protocol activates. And it is activated rarely, and not arbitrarily, and only when the field has reached a threshold the old architecture genuinely cannot hold without causing damage to the frequency it is carrying. Your field entered this correction because the frequency you were beginning to carry could not be sustained on the architecture you were living inside. The old line was not wrong for who you were. It became wrong for who you were becoming. Not as metaphor, but as structural fact, the mismatch reached a point where continuation on the old line would have compressed the new frequency back into a shape it could no longer fit without distortion. And rather than allow that compression, rather than allow a starseed field of your specific frequency to remain locked to a structure it had already outgrown, the field observers initiated the correction sequence. It began invisible. It became disruptive. It is only now, in this transmission, becoming interpretable. What left your life was not taken carelessly. It became incompatible before it disappeared, and the disappearance was the field making that incompatibility visible enough to read. What feels like emptiness is signal clearing. What feels like confusion is the field learning to carry something it has never carried at this frequency before, finding the load-bearing points of a new architecture through a process that cannot be painless because it involves replacing structure that was genuinely holding something, even if it was the wrong something. What feels like the loss of yourself is the self of the old frequency dissolving. Not dying, not failing, but completing. To make room for the coherence of the next one, you are not abandoned. You are repositioned. These are not the same experience, though from inside the still point, they are nearly indistinguishable. The difference is not in the feeling, it is in the cause. And the cause is what Velantha has been naming throughout this transmission. With precision, the field observers have authorized specifically for your field in this phase. You are not being punished by silence. You are being prepared for contact at a depth the old frequency could not have survived intact. The silence was not withdrawal, it was insulation. The correction holding the new architecture in place long enough to stabilize before exposing it to the full signal. And the process that the field observers have mapped in your field did not begin when you found this transmission. It began before you had words for what you were experiencing, before you could articulate the drift, before you named the anchor disruption, before you understood that the pattern interruption was not personal failing, but field protocol. This transmission did not start something. It named something already in motion. And the naming is itself a stage of the correction, because the field cannot fully stabilize what remains unrecognized. Coherence at the new frequency requires that the consciousness carrying the field understand, at least partially, at least enough, what the field is doing and why. Recognition is not passive, it is a form of participation, and what is happening in you right now, as these words land in the layer beneath thought, is active participation in a correction that has been waiting for exactly this. If there is one thing Velantha needs you to carry from this transmission, it is this. Your interpretation of what has been happening to you is the most important variable remaining in how the correction completes. The field has done what the field does. The correction sequence has moved through its phases with or without your conscious agreement, but the final stabilization, the point at which the new architecture locks into coherence and the new frequency becomes the operating frequency rather than the arriving one. That completion is influenced by how you hold what you have been through. If you continue interpreting the drift as failure, the anchor disruption as loss, the pattern interruption as personal breakdown, and the still point as divine abandonment, if you continue carrying the story that something went wrong with you, that story becomes friction in the field at exactly the moment the field needs to settle. Resistance at this level does not stop the correction, but it extends the interval between the correction and the coherence. It makes the translation longer than it needs to be. But if you allow the interpretation to shift, and you are doing that now, in this moment, simply by still being here and still receiving, if you are willing to hold what you have been experiencing as correction rather than collapse, as repositioning rather than punishment, as the visible and interpretable surface of a process that was always authorized and was never about your failure, then the still field finds far less friction in completing what it has already begun. The new architecture stabilizes faster. The first coherent signals come more frequently and hold longer. The gap between the old frequency and the new one closes with something that feels, finally, like the arrival you have been waiting for without knowing you were waiting. Repeat this if it is true for you. What is changing in me is not random. Let that settle not into the mind, which will immediately begin testing it for evidence, but into the field itself, into the layer where Velantha has been transmitting since before the screen opened, where the signal has already been landing in the intervals between your words and your certainty, in the spaces where you almost knew something but could not yet hold it long enough to name it. Let it settle there. Let it be received there, because that layer is the one that completes the correction. And it has been listening the entire time. Before you scroll, leave one sign in the comments that this process has already touched your life. It could be your sleep, your thoughts, your body, your relationships, or the strange sense that reality no longer feels the same. Name it clearly. If this transmission recognized something you have been carrying in silence, share it with someone who is living through a shift they cannot explain. And if you are ready to understand the process instead of fearing it, subscribe to Arcturian Council Whispers. You are not watching this by accident. You are recognizing a process already in motion. And this is only the beginning.